Is Trevor Davis in the audience?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Trevor. You asked three very good questions, and I'll start with the first, if I may. This is your statement. The EU is a racket that looks after its own. A true statement by Nigel Farage, especially in the context of the question, does charity begin at home? There is talk about the UK taxpayers paying towards EU pensions. Would one of the panelists like to make a comment, please?
Well, shall I start? And then Matthew, when I'm sure he's written many speeches for the CBI on the positive aspects of the EU. I'm sure he'll want to come in behind me. I disagree with you. The EU is not a racket. What the EU has provided, it has flaws, I accept that, and those need to be addressed. I think, for instance, the rigmarole of the Parliament meeting in two places is an outrage and needs to be stopped immediately. I think some of the issues around transparency, if you think members of Parliament have issues around transparency to do with their expenses, I think in the European Union, European Parliament, I think there are significant, even greater issues that need to be addressed. But fundamentally, what the EU is about ensuring that a UK company can produce something here and know that that product can be exported to any other EU country without tariffs applying. And what that provides for us as consumers, I think, is a better deal in terms of the products that we can buy, the products that we can purchase. It provides certainty to manufacturers here that when they produce a product that they will be able to get it into a different market. And of course, manufacturers here are the people who provide many jobs. So yes, as I said, I think there are aspects of the EU that we do need to address. I think that the EU needs to tighten its belt in the way that the UK government has had to tighten its belt. I was astounded that the EU was putting in a request for a large budget increase at the same time as the UK government was by necessity having to reduce our budget here. So, but I think the business aspect of it is something that is very positive.
Thank you very much.
I'll say a few words. Yeah, but I'll put my cards on the table. I think in a few years' time, having been a member of the European Parliament for 15 years, I will be in receipt of some sort of pension from the European Parliament, in the same way that anybody who works for any company would be. And I spent 15 years as a teacher as well, so I think I'll be in. Like as anybody, I contributed to a teacher's pension. I contributed to a European Parliament pension, which I'll get in a few years, hopefully a few more years time. So yes, but some of the pensions, I agree, some of the packages for high EU officials seem to be enormous, and I'm afraid that is not unique to the European Union. There's a lot of a scandal over the huge pension payoffs to people at BBC and other companies in this country, and people on enormous amounts, which are very difficult to justify. The European Union, as we now have it, was started in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War to prevent war in Europe. And on that count, it's been singularly successful. Well, NATO, you mentioned NATO. NATO is a military union, and military power can bring peace. What it cannot do is keep peace, and you need democratic structures. You need democratic structures to keep peace. The British Army brought some sort of peace in Northern Ireland, but the only lasting peace has become because there's democratic structures and people recognise that. European Union. I'm sorry? In where?
In the knee in Northern Ireland.
I can't hear what it's. I can't hear what.
I think he's saying people are still shooting people in Northern Ireland.
Oh well, the number of people being killed in Northern Ireland is a fraction of what it was before, and I think we should welcome the peace process there. The peace in Western Europe, brought about by the European Union, is immensely successful, and there may not be many people here, and I'm not one, who went through the generation that lived through war, and those people will welcome the fact there's now 28 countries in the European Union working closely together. Yes, there are all sorts of things that have to be done, Tom referred to the budget increase. Well, European Union, 28 countries. We know that there are some of the countries in the European Union that are poorer and need support. And I don't have any qualms about saying it's right that we should support the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, because many of them are emerging democracies that do need our support. And if we don't do that, we can, well, if you see people, have with great respect, then you want to look at the reasons why people come to this country from Poland, from Czech Republic, from other those countries. They will come here because they can earn there's no evidence to suggest that people leave those countries and come here just for the benefits. They come here with the intention of working, and the vast majority of them, a higher proportion of people from Central and Eastern Europe in this country, if you let me finish, instead of just trying to abuse it, if you did listen to the answer, you might find a little bit more informative. You may not agree with me, but at least might listen. The vast majority of people who uproot their family and themselves and travel hundreds of miles to another country where they perhaps are not as brilliantly averse with the language as they'd like to be, do so because they want to work. If we are serious about supporting those people, and if you have concerns about the number of people who come to this country from other countries in the European Union, then you should be supporting giving more money to those countries to help them so that their economies can recover, their countries can be more prosperous, and people can stay there, and they can live in their own communities there. You cannot have it both ways. If you have people in this country who still want to go and live in Spain, in France, and you want to travel around the world as well. So you really need to understand the whole complex situation.
I'll try and keep my comments brief and to the original statement that was made. I agree with Tom, absolutely. There are many positive aspects to the European Union in terms of when we work together on things, on consumer protection as an excellent example, on crime and security, and actually overseas aid, international aid is another area where collectively we can do far more than we could do individually. I think it's sad that other European Union countries haven't matched our efforts in terms of proportion of gross national income. There we go. But as for the overall comment as to whether or not it's a racket, I think the idea behind the EU, free movement of goods, capital, people and so forth is excellent. I think a lot of the ideals behind it are excellent. I think the way it's administered now is, I think a racket is a perfectly reasonable way to describe it. I think there is a terrible democratic deficit. I think its accounts haven't been signed off for, Suzanne will know this, 20 years or so?
Yep.
Yeah, something like that. So I think it's got problems. I think we need to reform it, and then we need to put the reformed EU to a referendum to the British people. And if we want to get out, well, we'll get out.
Thank you.
I have contributed, so I won't contribute again, but I would like to ask Matthew whether when he wrote speeches for the CBI about the EU, whether he ever called the EU a racket.
Well, it wasn't me making the speeches, so I'm sure I would never have put that word in the Director General's.
No, I'm sure.
But it might have been there in the subtext. And actually, I did write speeches about the European Union, and I criticised Michel Barnier, who was the Commissioner for Financial Services. And I said that some of his worst ideas were created by Laboratoire Barnier, and they were particularly damaging to one of this country's really great industries, which is financial services. So I wasn't against criticising them, or indeed putting the words in someone else's mouth, but I was normally skulking in the background somewhere. So had it been me, racket is a word I might well have used.
Suzanne, would you like to make a comment?
Well, I'm not going to disagree with Nigel Farage, am I? That could get me into terrible trouble. Yeah, of course it's a racket. It's an absolute racket. Over the next course of the European Parliament, we're going to be spending some 67 billion net, I think. Actually, not the next one, I think between now and 2020. I can't remember the exact figure, but it's a massive amount of money that we pay to the EU. £55 million every day. Yes, we get some of that back in terms of our rebate, but by anyone's calculations, even the most optimistic calculations, we get far less than half back. And the money really is squandered, and that to me is what a racket is. I don't know so much about pensions, I'll be honest, but I do know that the EU spent £400,000 on a fitness centre for dogs in Hungary that was, as far as we're aware, has never been built yet. It paid off debts that were incurred, private debts that were incurred by the King of Sweden, so he looked better. I don't know, perhaps Robert will know more about this than me, but I gather that Neil and Glenys Kinnock, between the two of them, when they were both working for the European Union, ended up earning some £10 million out of it by one estimate that I've seen. I mean, it's absolutely scandalous, the amount of money. And frankly, Robert, I know that it was supposed to be set up as this great political project to have peace in Europe after 2 world wars, and I'm sure at the time that was considered to be a very noble objective. But has it led to peace? No. Look at what's happening in the Ukraine. Now,
not in the European
Union. Exactly, but they want it to be in the European Union, and that's the problem. And there's no doubt that money was spent by the European Union to oppose Russia there. The civil unrests that we've seen on the streets across Europe as a result of the collapse of the euro, I don't call that peace.
Europe hasn't collapsed. I don't know if you've noticed.
It's collapsed in Greece, it's collapsed in Portugal, Greece is on the way out.
But
Ireland,
people, not long
it's been an
ago,
absolute
people from
disaster.
UKIP, Nigel Farage and others were saying that Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal were going to be pushed out of the euro, but they weren't.
They haven't been yet.
Very easy to quote the countries where there are problems, and of course there are problems in Greece, Italy, Spain, but you haven't quoted the countries like Germany, the Netherlands, and the other countries in the north where the euro is very successfully working. Had Britain been in the euro, which group would we have been? Might have been in the more successful one. Well, you know, the economies of some of these countries, the Netherlands is doing very well, thank you. Luxembourg.
I think you've also highlighted the problem there, that again...
If you'd have a question, madam, I'll give you a microphone so we can all hear.
There's another issue, isn't there, about when we joined the European Union, we had some influence. It was a group of nations that were of a similar economic base. As the European Union has expanded, we've got a lot less influence, and it's caused a lot more economic problems for us.
Find the EU's such a scandal and it's a racket. Why do you draw your salary from the European Union?
I don't.
The MEPs, why do they draw the salary?
Well, why shouldn't they? They do a job just like any other MEP in the Parliament.
It's almost endorsing it in a way. If you want to show principle,
what are you
don't
suggesting?
accept
They work
the salary.
for free? They work for free, they travel to Strasbourg, they travel to Brussels for free?
Don't have to draw the salary.
Actually,
Show principle and don't draw the salary. Can I carry on?
Look, can I just remind you that UKIP won the European elections. What are our MEPs supposed to do? Having been elected, sit at home and do nothing? And not go and not draw a salary?
When you turn up to the European Union,
When you're elected
do nothing
an MP,
anyway.
Thank you very much indeed. I think...
Can I just say...
I think we could spend the evening debating this, so I need to move on.
Can I just say one thing on the EU? Just one thing very quickly. There's a very important thing that's happening about the European Union and the US, which is the Transatlantic Trade and Partnership. TTIP as it's known. And I don't know how many of you know about it, but basically it means that the rules and regulations will change for corporations. So they'll actually have their own judicial system, that this is what is secretly being discussed. So when a corporation actually, let's say for example in Australia at the moment, Philip Morris, tobacconist, is actually looking to sue the Australian government for actually removing packaging on cigarette packets. They'll threaten to do that in this country as well through TTIP. Now, in other countries in South America, where they try to introduce a minimum wage, corporations have gone after them to be able to actually sue them as well for losses. Now, this is the discussion that's happening with the Lib Dems, Labour and the Conservative all in favour. Now, if you kind of approve this sort of behaviour, and you want us to be able to actually be sued by a corporation that's going to be taking on our NHS services in the future, let's say for example, then you've got a choice actually. You can vote for one of those three parties, or you go for the Green Party, which opposes TTIP.
As does UKIP.
Well, because it's a European Union issue, I guess.
Thank you very much indeed for your views, Sasha.
The EU is only as good as the member states and the people. The EU is the European Parliament, the European Commission and the Council of Ministers of the governments. It doesn't have a sort of driver of its own. It is only as good as the people who are putting into it. So if you think it's a racket, well then you've got to condemn all of those factions and you've got to condemn the successive government ministers from this country and from all the other countries. So, you know, we are part of it, so it's not a completely separate body. We're part of it, the UKIP members of the European Parliament, everybody involved in it, and it's up to all of us, if you think it's not functioning properly, to make it better.
Well, let's have a referendum then. Let's have a vote. And that's the problem, isn't it? We can't vote any of those unelected commissioners out. We're stuck with them.